Welcome back to the show with Danny and Gemma. Delighted to say we're now joined by the journalist and author Hadley Freeman. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
I'll show you the book that Hadley's written, and it's a profound experience that you had when you were a teenager. It's called Good Girls, A Story and Study of Anorexia. And you were in a psychiatric ward at the age of 14?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Just tell us how that came about.
Right after my 14th birthday, so May 1992, I was just in PE and I was sitting next to a girl in my class who was, one of those naturally very tiny girls. And I said to her without thinking, "Is it hard to buy clothes when you're so small?" And she said, "Yes, I wish I was normal like you." And within 3 months, I was in my first of 9 hospitalizations for anorexia.
Because normal like you suggested to you that you weren't slim enough?
Yeah, nothing, no identity, anonymous. And so that was the trigger. And I try to make clear in the book that the trigger is very different from the cause. People get very focused on trigger warnings these days and what might trigger someone's, past trauma. But actually the causes for something like anorexia, which is a mental illness, are very deep-rooted, and the causes went back years, and anything could have triggered me.
Oh, I see. So that was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Exactly.
And tell me about your experience of being so young inside a mental hospital.
Yes. So at that point in 1992, it was relatively uncommon for girls my age then at 14 to be hospitalized. Now it's much more common. And it was incredibly traumatic. I basically lived on different psychiatric wards from the ages of 14 to 17. I was around schizophrenics, drug addicts, alcoholics, and of course other girls and women with anorexia. But I was always the much, much youngest one on the ward. There were women there who were in their 60s who had lived with it all their lives. So I did my GCSEs on my hospital bed, supervised by someone from my school. My parents shuttled my homework back and forth between the schools for me.
Did your parents get frustrated?
Oh, yeah. they frustrated and terrified. Anorexia is the mental illness with the highest rate of mortality. The rough statistics are about 1/3 of girls and women with it die, 1/3 live with it all their lives, and 1/3 recover. And I'm very grateful to be in the third that recovered.
And was it being in the psychiatric ward and having that professional help that got you to recover, or was it almost the opposite?
Well, sort of like with prisons, you pick up a lot of bad habits on an eating disorders ward. An eating disorders ward is very different from a general hospital ward or an A&E ward in that you're in there for 3 to 6 months and you're with mainly other girls and women. Anorexia is 90% female suffered illness. And so it's a bit like boarding school, and you're all swapping tips on how you avoid food, how you burn off calories. I learned about how to make myself sick in hospital, about laxatives, about cutting, all these things I had no idea about before. But without a doubt, being in hospital saved my life. It forced the food down me. I wouldn't have eaten otherwise. But having said that, I made a lot of friends in hospital, girls in their late teens and 20s who died. So it's by no means a guarantee.
Is it like being an alcoholic where when you come out, you're never not an alcoholic?
Yes, and also the problem with coming out of an anorexia ward is you have to not just keep eating, you have to put on weight normally. The hospitals don't have the money or the beds to keep you in to get you to a fully healthy weight. They get you to a point where your body is not in danger, where your organs won't shut down, and then you have to keep putting on weight outside of hospital.
Wow. In interviews I've done before with anorexics or people who are the parents of mainly girls with anorexia, it's often a single comment from the father. And I've got 2 teenage daughters. You have a teenage daughter, right?
Yeah.
I always remember Prince Charles, as he then was, saying to Diana, "Oh, you look as if you've got a bit of fat on you," or something. That was reported, and I thought, wow, never, ever, ever. Never make any comments about my girl's physical appearance. I'm so scared.
It's very difficult. And my daughter, who's 19, took me to task once with language I was using about myself, because my weight does fluctuate. And I think I said something like, I can't remember what I said, but I basically said something sort of about my weight, about fit. And she was like, really had a go at me. And I was like, you're right. And I really tried to be just talking about, healthy. Let's eat healthily, let's do activity, because it's frightening.
I mean, one thing I do want to make clear in the book is that anorexia is not about wanting to look thin. It's a way for girls and women to express unhappiness or anger or anxiety. You know, girls and women find it very hard often to express those emotions, and therefore they try to do it non-verbally. They do it through their body and they take it out on themselves. That's why it's girls and women who mainly starve themselves, make themselves sick, and cut themselves. However, the language that girls hear around them, that, you know, your body is the most important thing about you, that a woman values herself by how slim she is, that provides a language to them with which to express their unhappiness.
So, do you think that's changed? I know social media has a lot of bad things about it, but the way it's changed, I've got a daughter, she's adult now. Obviously, image is hugely popular, but the way that social media has changed, and like I said, you know, back when we were younger, it was about being thin. Models in the papers were stick thin, catwalk models were stick thin. That's changed quite dramatically. Has that made any sort of difference?
No, not really. Rates of anorexia are generally the same. Rates of eating disorders are going up for girls and women. It's you know, girls and women have always expressed unhappiness through their bodies. Control, and also a way of avoiding becoming a woman, a way of avoiding being sexualized, a way of being, avoiding men looking at you. Anorexia almost always sets in around puberty. And there are, you know, records going back to 800 AD of girls starving themselves then. A lot of the medieval saints we know about today, like Joan of Arc, they were starving themselves.
Oh, really?
Yes, but back then it was seen as a sign of holiness.
Yeah. There's a story you might be interested in the Telegraph, which is that Scots pupils are urged to wear pronoun badges. The reason I mention this is you've been very vocal, Hadley, about maybe a link between anorexic boys and girls and people wanting to change gender.
Yes, so I didn't think I was going to address that in this book, but as I was writing it, I saw a news report saying that at GIDS, which was the NHS's youth gender clinic in England, that the makeup of the patients was now 70% 14-year-old girls. And that really stood out to me because, you know, the makeup of an eating disorder ward is about 90% 14-year-old girls now.
So people who get eating disorders tend to then want to change gender as well?
No, not at all. So the girls are finding different ways to avoid becoming women, avoid being sexualized. They're shrinking their breasts. And in fact, the CAS report, which came out, I guess, 2 weeks ago now, noted this correlation because it was very striking how suddenly there was this huge increase in teenage girls identifying as boys. And, you know, the whole issue of gender dysphoria and trans, it's a very broad umbrella. And an adult male who says that he desires to live as a woman is going to be very different from a 14-year-old girl who suddenly says she's scared of being a woman. All
right. Now, there's another area which Hadley's been vocal about, which is about sex work and your thought that it's not work, it's abuse. And I wanted to show you this story, which is this crazy story which came out of The Spectator. And I think we've got, you know, this guy Lloyd Evans. So this is the Mail's headline. The Spectator theatre critic who admitted in print to lusting after a Cambridge lecturer so much he couldn't concentrate on her arguments and then slept with a Chinese prostitute after haggling £20 off the price. And that pretty much sums up what he wrote. Yep. He said he went to see this woman, give a lecture. He felt turned on by her, so he went to see a prostitute.
Yes, and there's been a big move in progressive circles in the past decade to say that sex work is work, arguing that accords dignity to the women who sell sex. In fact, in my view, and in the view of many anti-sex work campaigners, it just provides a fig leaf to the men who buy sex, because it is very largely men who buy sex. And the story in The Spectator really shows the lie of this idea that sex work is empowering to women in any way or liberating. Instead, this ridiculous person from The Spectator goes to see a prostitute next to Cambridge train station, haggles her down by £20, and then has sex with her. And to me,
it's one of the most bizarre articles I've ever read.
Just the fact he thought it was all right to publish it and put his name and his face to it is weird, because what he was essentially saying was that he sort of saw this woman was sort of then so out of control that he had to immediately go and have his end of it. And it's a bit like, ooh, you sound a bit risky.
Yes, but also I feel like I can hardly blame him. And the fact that prostitution is presented in so many places as something a bit sexy and a bit aspirational. You look at the West End, there's a musical of Pretty Woman, there's a musical of Moulin Rouge. Both of these have women who are stuck in the sex trade.
But isn't that the your empowering thing? It's we don't want the idea that women are forced into it. We'd rather believe that women have taken control of their lives, right?
Yes, of course.
But surely that's the top 0.5% that actually are empowered by that.
0.001%.
Well, yeah.
That's the sort of high-class escorts.
It's an incredibly small amount that actually have a real choice.
Although the film, Leo Grande, whatever it's called, with Emma Thompson, is interesting.
Although
Okay,
that, again,
I don't know anything about that.
But that is where a woman buys sex from a man. And again, that is a very small and non-representative depiction of prostitution, whereas the fact is prostitution is built on the bodies of trafficked women and children.
We should mention, I think we got a tweet by the Cambridge professor. So we should mention her, Professor Lee E.P., who that was just kind of shocked. I mean, basically, she said, having read this extraordinary piece, next time I'm going to make sure my hair's tied in a bun because, obviously I looked too attractive when I was giving this lecture. What an extraordinary fiasco that story is. It's amazing.
Dreadful.
So anyway, back to Hadley. Hadley Freeman, the book is Good Girls. There we are, a story and study of anorexia. It's particularly about Hadley's time in a psychiatric ward when you were just a very, very young woman, 14, 15, 16, extraordinary. Thank you for talking about it. And if you've been affected by anything we've just discussed, Beat Eating Disorders offers support helplines that can provide help for people who need someone to talk to. So Beat Eating Disorders, just head to their website now. So let's look at some more stories in the papers. And there's one actually in the Telegraph. Patients treated by female doctors have a lower chance of dying. What's going on here, Hadley?
So this is a study from America saying that the death rate for female patients was fractionally smaller than when treated by a male doctor. And actually, my experience entirely accords with that, in that my first psychiatrist I had when I was a teenager was a man who was dreadful and was eventually struck off for having a relationship with one of his patients. And the psychiatrist who got me better was a woman. There are a lot of generalizations that one can make from this, but we do know that male doctors tend to underestimate female patients' pain and dismiss their symptoms as just them being a bit bored, them being bored or housewives.
Men are taking a bit of a thrashing.
Bit of a beat in this one.
Bit of the show, yeah.
I mean, again, you can get stats to disprove anything. Flip that round, and I don't know, but what's the number of male surgeons compared to female surgeons that save lives? I'm assuming it's a much higher percentage of men are surgeons than women.
But imagine we're on our deathbed and we're told there's two nurses, there's a male nurse and a female nurse. Which one is going to spend more time with you? I know the answer.
This is very specific. This is the death rate for female patients. It's, as Hadley said, I mean, if a man had ever had a coil fitted, if a man had ever experienced birth, I'm sorry. I was sat at a table with some lovely men, friends, the other day having dinner, and me and my girlfriend, we slightly ended up giggling at them because they were moaning about their aches and pains. My back, my knee injury, my this. And I just went, we've both expelled people from our bodies. And they were like... Oh, yeah, okay. And I think women play down their pain, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just carry on. And
Yeah.
I think doctors underestimate it and dismiss symptoms as depression or anxiety when in fact it's something far more serious.
All right, Danny and the BBC website, they've got a story about Iraqi father who's taking action against BP. So tell us about this.
Sorry, I missed that one.
OK, here we are. Let me show you. Father started legal action against the UK oil giant BP, 21-year-old son. Basically, it's an oil field in Iraq. And as it burns excess gas, it flares. And the father said that caused his son to have cancer. So let's have a look.
Yeah.
تعودت دائما كل ما أطلع من البيت هاي الشغلات تبكي. أنا المريض علي حسين جلود مرض سرطان بالدم. أنا عايش في منطقة الرمال الشمالية بجانب شركة نفطية بريطانية اللي هي شركة البيبي.
Yeah, it'd be a hard one to prove, won't it?
This reminds me of Erin Brockovich, the film where the lawyer, took on the water companies and the pollution and the cancer that the people were getting from it. This man, Hussein Jaloud, a grieving father. And yeah, he strongly suspects that his 21-year-old son's death was, in part because of the air that he was inhaling as a result of
It's incredibly
BP.
sad, first and foremost. I think we have to all understand that.
But I don't know whether you have to do gas flaring these days. It seems to me like you've got to stop that.
Yes, and they live next to the field where there's more gas flaring than anywhere else. And like you've said, that this is very similar to a lot of the cases that have happened in America. There's currently cases going on in Flint, Michigan, about the water being poisoned there. So it's an environmental litigation, and I think that BP seems to acknowledge that they understand the case.
Gemma has a story about old age and when it starts.
Yes.
So sometimes you think it's 70, but it seems to be moving upwards.
Well, that's right. So as time goes on, we are all living to riper old ages. So therefore, the perception of when we get old changes. We've all heard the phrase, what is it? 40 is the new 30, 50 is the new 40. Obviously, I think 50 is the new 21. But yes, and it is true. And I think in a very progressive, wonderful way. We're lucky science has evolved so much. We're all being kept alive longer. You know, our diets are better than they were.
OK, when do we start being old? What's the age?
In my view,
Yes.
I'm going to go for 80.
What do you think, Danny?
I think it depends how you look and how you act. It's interesting. My father-in-law is early 70s. For the first time the other day, I think someone let him through a door, whatever. There was a father and a child, and the child said to his dad, "Oh, that old man." And it's the first time he'd heard it.
Oh.
And he's early 70s, but it was the first time he'd heard somebody say "old man," and it sort of he wasn't upset by it, but it sort of he went, "Oh yeah, perhaps I am."
That's me in 15 years.
I know.
It's coming.
Is that all?
I'm trying to push it. I want to push it to.
I think it depends what you look like, how you act.
Well, my neighbour has a more active social life than anyone I know, and she's 91. So she's my
She's
idol.
old. She's old. You know, there's no doubt.
And yet she's constantly having people over in her garden. She's having little dinner parties.
Yeah, it's attitude, it's spirit, it's being open to newness, it's being curious, it's trying to listen to young people as well and not dismiss what they say as rubbish. All those things keep you young, I
It's
think.
just a number.
Yeah. Okay. There's a lovely story about a guy called Daniel Chalice. He's quite severely disabled, and he appealed on social media for somebody with a regional accent, the accent he would have had, because his the computer that speaks on his behalf, he programs and so on, doesn't really have his voice, and he's now got a new voice with a Walsall accent. Let's take a look.
Hi, this is my old voice. It's a robot voice. It isn't me. I had it for years. I wonder what can I do? I have to get help, find a voice.
Eli was one of the voices Dan kept going back to. We had it for quite a while. We listened to it a few, we whittled it down to a few, and he kept going back to that particular one.
Thanks for your help, and it's fantastic, Eli. It makes me really happy to share with my family.
Oh, that's so lovely. It means so much to me. Thank you, Dan.
The other person there is called Eli Lane, and he's the one whose voice was selected, and now that's the programmed voice, which is great. Matt Allwright is here. Isn't that a great story?
Do you know